right, everyone. Hey, how's it going? Jesse here. And we have Mike and Long that are going to be joining us. I'll be your host for today, along with Dan, and we're going to be talking a little bit about converting online leads, everyone's favorite kind of subjects. So I'm going to let Mike and Long do their own introductions because I wouldn't be able to do them justice. So I'll let you guys kind of open up with that in case nobody knows who you guys are.
All right. Well, thank you, Jesse. Long, want to do the intro?
You can start, bud.
All right, cool. So Long and I own a brokerage in Minnesota. It's called Realty Group. We've got now nearly 400 agents. We started only 5 years ago. We started technically 10 years ago, but we really started growing it as a brokerage about 5 years ago with 8 agents. Today, we're pushing 400. We are very, very big on systems, process, and lead generation, something that we've been, kind of dabbling with at a pretty high level since the beginning.
Nice. And I think you guys made the fastest growing like Fortune 5,000 list or something like that too, right?
We did this year. So top 500, fastest growing brokerage in Minnesota of all brands, including national ones, but also
Nice.
top 500, regardless of franchise, non-franchise, national, top 500 in the United States as of today.
In the United States on the Real Trends list, basically.
You got it. Yeah.
Nice. Congratulations. All right. So, we'll kind of get straight into, the online lead gen part of this and converting those online leads. I think there's two primary ways that people are going to look at this. It's either you're an individual agent and some of the best practices of converting leads. And I'm going to define it a little bit by source as well, because I believe there's some differences in between those two. And then also, if you're a team leader who's running an ISA, we're going to try and touch a little bit in terms of what are some best practices using an ISA to help you convert those online leads. We'll just talk a little bit about some general workflows that are out there. If anyone has a question, obviously hit the chat. Let us know if we're doing a good job. Give us some likes basically in the comments on Facebook. That would be awesome. We would really appreciate that, and any kind of feedback. And in that way, we can try and address all of your answers. So to start off with, Mike, Long, can you tell us a little bit? Let's focus on your 400 agents. What are you seeing as kind of their primary online lead gen? What sources are they using? And maybe talk to some of the best practices that you're seeing from your top agents that are doing, 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 transactions a year out of your company.
Sure. So first, I'm going to say this. A lot of agents, and I think it's not just our agents, but the primary source that most agents are using or utilizing is their sphere of influence and referral business, right? So that's always like one of the biggest buckets. And I've talked with agents all the time that tell me, I don't really work with online leads. And I said, well, you kind of do, because even if you're a referral agent, all those people you're working with and all those people in your sphere of influence, there's a lead for somebody else. So either you need to understand what's going on,
right,
or participate in it yourself. But some of the best sources that we're working with, we've done very well with Realty.com. In our market, Realty.com just shifted, and they've taken away all connections, and they've gone completely to OpCity.
Right.
The second model that we're seeing a lot of right now is the by referral only model. Or the referral pay only model. So you're looking at OpCity, HomeLight, Redfin, things of that nature.
Right.
And then the big secret right now, or I shouldn't say secret, the big secret people are starting to really understand is Facebook leads, which everybody used to think were horrible. All you heard is how they suck. A lot of us are figuring out how to really convert those at a high level. So that's kind of the three things we're seeing a lot. And then the last one, what we've done, and it goes back to our history, is sign calls, which I'm sure you'd appreciate based on the fact of call action. But Long ran a very successful REO operation for many years. He was one of the top REO agents in the state. Well, he was at one time getting 900 phone calls a month off of his signs. So we've always seen the value in call capture and identifying a lead on a sign call. So that's been our four-prong approach right there.
So, when we talk about these different lead sources, right, there's obviously different intent based on what they're inquiring about. And as we kind of understand the intent of each one of those leads, it also predicates like the type of follow-up and the length of follow-up that we're going to need to do with these individuals. Can you maybe talk about the intent of, let's say, a Facebook lead versus a sign call versus, maybe an OpCity lead? And what is the best practice that you're kind of seeing on each one of those? And how does that original lead source, how do you define the intent based on the original lead source?
Well, I'll tell you what, it's a great question. I think it's really trying to identify the track they're on. And what I mean by that is we've had Facebook leads that convert in 5 minutes.
Right.
We've had Realty.com portal leads that should be high intent, transactional buyers that take 2 years. Mm-hmm. So it's sort of a nugget or a clue based on lead source, but not always a full indicator. One of the first things that we're trying to do is identify what track they're on. Are you like a long-term nurture that you're not buying for 2 years? Because that's going to be a completely different action plan than somebody that has the intent that they want access or information on specific property. Mm-hmm. So we have to determine a timeline of when they want to move, as well as what challenges or obstacles are in their way, so we can solve those problems if necessary. But somebody that's a high intent buyer, they're going to want phone calls and speed to lead. They're going to want, responsive agents. They're going to want access and information to properties that they have interest in, versus somebody that's very aspirational in their approach and they're just thinking of moving someday. Mm-hmm. It's like a game of Tetris, right? I mean, if you get the wrong message with the wrong buyer at the wrong time, it pretty much stops the game. So you've got to make sure that you're identifying which action you need to stay on.
Yeah, we've talked, you and I, quite a bit about what we call the lead funnel, basically. So aspirational at the top, research kind of in the middle of that funnel, and then at the very bottom of the funnel is more transactional. So for ART. And so what you're talking about is quickly trying to identify based on their intent, and maybe the first kind of really proactively listening to what their questions are at the very beginning and maybe asking the right questions, is to try and identify what sliver or what tranche that they're in. Are they aspirational? Are they research? Or are they transactional? And then kind of message matching off of that, basically, to kind of accelerate that process. Kind of way.
Yes, because for years we've all been taught, book the appointment, book the appointment, book the appointment.
Right.
And for somebody that's transactional, that's great. But somebody that's aspirational, that's actually a big off-putting turnoff. You almost got to remove the pressure for them to buy and set yourself up as a resource. That's what is trying to book them an appointment and sell them the house they're not ready for. So for years, working with especially if you're a large buyer of portal leads, and you're getting hundreds of leads a month in from Zillow, .com, Trulia, and your job at that point is trying to find those people ready to go right now. You want to book those appointments and get them in the house before somebody else does. That's starting to change, I think, quite a bit in a lot of our approaches.
Right.
And if you really think about it, right, we're in the people business anyway. So instead of calling a lead, a lot of time I would like to refer to like an opportunity, because it's not a lead yet until it's further down in the lead funnel, like you said. And converting the lead is an art, which coincidentally is the acronym we use here, right? Aspiration, research, or transactional. So you got to know the source of where the opportunity came from, so you know how far they are down in the lead funnel. And then the key that so far we've been touching on without saying it is you have to have process and system put in place so that you can know that if it's a new 2-year nurture or calling back right now. Because without process and system in place, most of the time all leads sucks, right? Because you don't have process system in place, because what a large percentage of these don't close for 9 months to 18 months later down the road. So only 1 to 3% is like low hanging fruit that you convert them within the next few weeks. Other than that, without process and system, you're just throwing money away all this time.
And this is where we're seeing, teams and agents where they feel like, oh, I got to buy more leads, because they don't have the process to do the nurture on the 97% of leads that are not the buy now or in that transactional funnel, and they're way upstream. But if they don't have a process in place to be able to automate or at least give themselves some scale to follow up on all of those nurture leads really long term, then they're just basically driving up the cost of every closing, because there's 97% of the leads that most likely are just going to be cold and sitting in their database. What do you see, or how do you is there some key questions that you use or phrases that you're training your team to be able to identify where they're at in those art funnel, basically?
So first, before I touch on that, I want to touch on what you just talked about. There's 2 different philosophies I see people do in when they're buying leads. If they want to be profitable, they're either going to buy more leads, because if they're even profitable at a 2-to-1 ratio, in order to make more money, I'll just buy more leads.
Right.
And another mentality is, well, I'm not going to buy more leads. I'm going to optimize the leads I have.
Right.
So I think really smart teams or solo agents that are doing this are going to try to do both at a high level, right?
Right.
Back to your question on how do we qualify them. One of my favorite questions to ask always is, in a perfect world, when would you like to be in your new home?
Mm-hmm.
I like to establish a timeline before I go any further, because I know if somebody is, a year out, my next follow-up question is, what's it, what is it about a year? Why does a year look attractive to you? Let them tell me if they've got a problem to solve. Maybe it's credit repair, they're in a lease, but I want to dig into when they're thinking of moving, why they're thinking of moving, and where they are in the process. Have they even started the research on this yet? If I can figure those 3 things out, then I know what my next steps are going to be.
And when someone basically responds and they kind of tell you, oh, I'm in a lease, do you encourage your agents to kind of keep going deeper on those questions and really get down to their why versus, just kind of more of a checklist kind of thing?
Yes and no. I don't encourage the agent, because one thing that we do a little differently is we have a single point of contact ISA system that we get the ISA who's really skilled at this.
Okay.
To dig in and get the information. And then when they're ready to be passed off to an agent, it's a much cleaner handoff rather than giving an agent somebody that's going to recreate the same conversations and hopefully handle it the same way.
Right.
So I'm a big proponent that if you're going to generate leads on a pretty big scale, it's really good to have an ISA team in place that you're able to handle a lot of that early qualification.
And that's just part of the process system, right? We use this cool thing called call action. And it's pretty awesome. I think one of you guys will probably cover more on this. But having call action put in place, we capture a lot of these. I think Mike talked about this all the time. That half the calls nowadays are spam call. So most don't even pick up the call. What we're doing is we're missing on opportunities again. There's a lot of things that the reason the leads aren't that good is because there's no process system put in place to capture them, to nurture them, and to optimize.
Or even back to your questions, right? It should be something that it's a generalized process, that these are the first questions we're going to ask.
Right.
And then based on the response, it's if this and that.
Right.
Right. And we know the next, response. Now, if I'm going to train 15, 20, 100, 400 agents on that process, it's going to get clunky.
Right.
If I create a small group of people that are highly skilled in that process, by the time they're ready to pass off that agent, pretty much at bat, then the agent's job is trying to help them accomplish an easier task of accessing information to specific property.
Right.
Makes sense?
Right. On the old leads, like when you're basically doing a long-term nurture, can you tell us a little bit what does that look like in terms of the outreach and maybe the cadence of that outreach, depending on, if they're aspirational versus research? What's the difference between nurturing those two kinds of leads, that you guys kind of push as kind of best practices?
So a couple of different things. One thing I don't love about long-term nurture is, unless I'm controlling their home search, they're going to be all over Zillow, Trulia, everybody else's stuff, right? So one of the first things that I'm trying to accomplish to the task is get them on our home search.
Right.
So we use YLopo for this, that we're retargeting all those old leads with, like, almost the way Amazon does with relevant products, we're doing with relevant property, to try to make sure that they're seeing properties they like and they'll engage with getting them into a home search. That's almost step number one, right? Now, with that, if you really think about this, and you understand this, Jesse, I know you get this, that if I'm going to have 1,000 leads in my database and I don't know where some of them are, like some of them are research, some transactional, some, aspirational. If I'm trying to call and dial, like, treat everybody the same, like I'm throwing them all in the same pot, simmering at the same temperature, I might have to call and dial each of those people on average maybe 5 times to 12 times before they ever pick up and have a real conversation with me, right? Well, how does that scale? And maybe I have to have, 5 or 10 conversations over the course of a year on average before they buy. Well, how does that scale? Over 10 leads, I can do that. Over 100, it gets harder.
Right.
Over 1,000 or 2,000 or 50,000, it gets impossible. So you have to create some automation behind this if you want to do it at a higher level.
Right.
And the cadence on that's going to be based on either a long-term action plan, or am I going to front load and blast on a short-term action plan based on where I think they're at? So in the longer-term ones, it's probably going to be a slower cadence that the touch points are.
Right.
And remove the pressure from them to buy. Really set ourselves up as a resource, and hoping to find some relevancy, like find messaging that's going to be relevant and focus in on that.
Yeah. I think you touched on something that's really important on the front end, which is, the amount of attempts it takes to get a hold of someone. One really critical KPI is that people are looking at like, oh, I need to buy more leads. I need to buy more leads. So one KPI that I think most people really need to focus on is what is the engagement or the contact rate of the leads that you're currently buying. So let's say, for example, you're buying 100 leads and you're only able to connect or engage or have a conversation with, let's say, 30 of those leads. Well, really, the conversion rate is only based on whatever the amount of people that you're talking to. So one of the first things that people can try and do is to really start tracking what percentage of leads that they're engaging with. Because if you are able to increase that first, you may not need to buy as many lead opportunities. Because if I have 100 leads and I only talk to 30% of them, really means I only had 30 conversations or 30 opportunities is what Long basically says. But if I'm able to double the amount of engagement to, let's say, 60, it's the same thing as buying twice the amount of leads. So first, we kind of need to optimize our processes in order to be able to have more conversations up front. And again, I think this kind of touches base to scale. How do you tell your agents to do that? And what are kind of some best practices beyond the Facebook retargeting, which is part of that kind of being omnipresent and having those touches with those people to increase the likelihood of having more conversations in the future? Do you have some baseline numbers and some best practices on that?
Yeah. So for one thing, I love the way that you're talking about it, because you're right. If I can organically reach 30%, just in my original efforts, right? But then I can build in some processes to optimize those leads. I'm doubling my conversion without any more time, money, or real effort, right?
Right.
Now, and then back to your question. Can you rephrase the question real quick? I was stuck on that.
What are some of the best practices that you're seeing in terms of being able to start tracking that engagement, and how do you increase that engagement beyond the Facebook retargeting?
Sure. So even with some of the if you want to call them drip campaigns, I'm not a huge proponent of a lot of the template drip campaigns that you see through a lot of the CRM. So I do like to kind of build out some of our own. And I like to figure out what people are responding to. So if I can figure out, what's going to be relevant for that consumer, then we can start tagging by relevancy. If somebody is really responsive to messages or drips that are about, renter stuff, like, renter tax advantages and, rent versus buy information, and I'm starting to see engagement there, then we can probably start funneling down that information based on relevancy, right? And we're going to hit those audiences maybe different than somebody that's looking at credit repair information or mortgage information, right? So data really helps with this. If you can create data within your database to figure out which audiences are going to respond better to different messages. And another thing that call action I really like too, it's the campaigns we can do through call action, which are text-based, which I think is really good too, because if we're finding a better engagement on the text-based than we are on the email-based, so those are two things that I can recommend that you do, is make sure your campaigns are tight, customize them where you need them, and make sure to track what's working and then tweak what's not.
Right.
Yeah.
The other day.
Can I add real quick, Jesse?
Yeah, of course.
So the other thing too is like going down the funnel, if you want to call it that too, is that you got to track everything, right? Because you touched on that a little bit, because people just go straight from how much a lead costs to when it closed, and they do like a 3%. But you get that. When you track, you start seeing leading and lagging indicator, right? Right. So the lagging indicator is how many you close. Well, before that, it's how many clients you ended up getting from it. Before that is how many appointments you made. Before that, how many engagement you made. Before that, how many contacts you made. And before that was the opportunity you got before it turned into a lead. Is the data or the contact information is valid? You're not chasing after ghosts. So once you figure out each of those stages, from opportunity to contact, then you start breaking down each of those numbers, and you start doing training on it to get better at it. So if you improve even 5% at each of those stages, you're gonna double your conversion ratio. By having process system in place and tracking everything, because if you don't know which part you're weak at, let's say contact, you only call 3 times. Mike said, 7 to 12, right? Right. You only contact 3 times, you give up. You might have missed a bunch of opportunity that could turn into a lead because you haven't made contact with them.
Right. Just having that initial conversation. I mean, I'll give you kind of a personal story with us and Robert Slack. So, on his account, he's the number one buyer of Realtor.com leads, and they were averaging, even with a full-time call center, only about a 34% engagement rate, meaning they would buy 10,000 leads and they would talk to 3,400 of those people. And once we kind of out this really longer term initial follow-up through basically different channels and slightly different messaging through basically our services, we were able to double basically the number of conversations from 3,400 up to 6,700. But he didn't have to go out and spend an extra $430,000 a month on leads, basically. So in all essence, like simply focusing in on that one little tiny KPI in terms of what's our engagement rate saved $5 million a year in buying extra leads that are not even available. And, as the portals start to kind of consolidate where they're delivering leads to, we have less opportunity at leads, meaning we can't just buy leads on demand. We can't buy duplicate leads from a bunch of, other leads that people forgot now, because they're trying to take all of those leads in-house. So I think that KPI of the initial engagement rate is the number one leading indicator that we have, because until you've reached like the maximum potential of reaching those leads, you're really just leaving money on the table if you're trying to just backfill that by buying more leads, right?
Let me add to that too. So this is where I go back into segmentation, right? So if you're really good at tagging and segmenting, if you can figure out what stage each lead's at, like the farther down the tunnel they get, maybe they're in the research phase, they just start becoming, in my opinion, they become more prone to respond and engage with things like video messaging.
Right.
They've seen you for a while and they've seen your stuff, and all of a sudden they start seeing your face and hearing your voice. You have an opportunity to really brand yourself. It's not just about speed to lead and just being an extension of Realtor.com or Zillow opening a door anymore. Right. Now you're able to build a solid relationship and trust over time. And if you can figure out where they're at in those stages and insert the proper messages, we see that the conversion rate's just been so much higher like that. Right. And actually the value is you get to build that relationship over time, build loyalty over time, and then create a better referral base from this over time. That's what we're finding.
Yeah. Even in those areas, even when you start doing video, you got to start, watching and tweaking the wording, the tone, the way you say stuff. I mean, all these little things people forget, like you said, both you and Mike, is that each area, you just improve on that, you already double your conversion ratio without doubling the money you spend on it. So there's so much opportunity to improve in each of those areas once you start tracking and understanding that they're all different stages. It's not just get a lead and then you jump right to closing and you track that.
Yeah, for example, like a lot of people are going to say, oh, well, I have got a long-term nurture. But if you're only nurturing through one communication channel, let's just say only email through your CRM, if the customer is not living in email, in other words, like if they're not maybe like a white collar kind of person or an office worker where it's normal for them to check their email, very regularly, email may not be effective to that person. And that's why you need to jump into different communication channels to become omnipresent, meaning trying the major primary ways to communicate with someone to get to that first interaction. Because if they're not responding to email, and you notice that if you start making outbound phone calls, then that's one little tweak. Or like one trick that we have is that before we make an outbound phone call to a customer, we send a text message and then call immediately. Little subtle kind of micro efficiencies like that really start to add up over time.
So one thing I like to do too is train our agents based on memorable and portable terminology. So what we call that is the double tap. That way, when we train agents, we can say, did you do the double tap? They know what we're talking about. It text first, then call.
Right.
Otherwise, when you're training agents, a lot of times they forget to do those simple things. So we've got a lot of tactics like that and strategies like that we have named that that's portable, memorable, and we can train on. I think that's super important because people don't generally answer your call when they don't know who you are. We're finding that more and more all the time. You got to be able to show them why you're calling, what the intent. Yeah. So
the other day, in Lab Coat Agents, I know I posted a question and I asked basically, where did your last lead come from? And I think we had something like 750 comments. I mean, it was a massive amount of comments. And then I took the time to kind of take all of those comments and distill that into what was the actual lead sources that it came through. And the vast majority of them were actually, referrals, which we already know, sphere of influence and referrals is always critical. Within that, there's like subgroups, right? There's friends and family referrals, there are, professional referrals, and there's past client referrals. And I know that we're talking about online lead gen, but it's interesting to see how much people seem to believe that those two things are different, that an online lead is different than what a referral lead is, because the reality, like you alluded to earlier, is that your online leads will become your referrals, and they may become your better referrals because if they're online, it's much easier for them to refer you to a bunch of other people.
Look at this way too, Jesse. If you really think about it, right? Even I talk to referral agents all the time. They don't purchase online leads. They never have, never will. But the point I'm making on this is the referrals you're working with, they're online and they're going to be in somebody else's lead funnel. And if you don't have defenses to hold your leads together, referral or not, somebody else is going to start taking them, and they already are taking them, and you just don't know it yet.
Right.
There's close to you between the numbers I always hear is between 30 million and 50 million online lead shoppers every year.
Right.
Now, when you look at, duplicates and double logins and stuff like that, Zillow alone reports 190 million logins a month. So with 5.5 million home buyers in the US, do the math on that. Everybody buying a home is a lead 10 times over for somebody else. So you have to kind of understand what that whole process looks like and what others are offering and saying and doing. If you're not telling your narrative, then somebody else is going to tell theirs. If you're not campaigning your referral base, somebody else is. So I think it's vitally important to realize that A, if you're a referral agent, it's still happening, and B, even if you're a referral agent and you've got, maybe 10 or 15 really top referral sources, you can always top grade that. You can take your weakest links out and create a really strong, even stronger referral base by meeting some really great online lead people. You're slipping into that referral base over time, and you can continue to make that stronger. If you don't know in your own life people that can really increase the strength of your referral base, these online leads often can. It happened in my personal production.
This is why NAR done the studies, right? When they survey people, 87% of people said they'll use the same agent again, yet only 17% people do.
Right.
Why? Because people like us are upstreaming that when they're just at their research or aspiration. We catch them before they even can get transactional. But by now, they're not calling their agent anymore. And that's what Mike is talking about, is that besides just setting up to protect your own database before someone else come in and take it from you because you're not doing what you should be doing.
Yeah, we definitely live in a time of instant gratification. So if you think the customer is going to reach out at the moment that they have the highest sense of urgency when they find a home, you don't have very many opportunities on that, even if you came as a referred agent. But kind of touching base in the difference between, the segmentation of an online lead and, let's say, a sphere of influence, can you maybe tell the audience what you guys believe is really the difference between the two? Because at the end of the day, there's still two people that are saying they're interested in buying real estate. So there's no difference there. But what is the core difference you believe between a SOI and, let's say, an online lead?
Sure. I think the core difference is the last letter of SOI. It's the influence. When you're getting the referral, you're almost leveraging the influence that you have with that referrer. They're giving you the warm handoff, which you don't get that with the online, right?
So the trust is being transferred from referrer to referee automatically. Right. And because the consumer trusts the person inherently that they asked the referral for, there's a difference there basically between that type of customer.
Yes.
Do you think also the intent is different? Because if you think of, let's say, how a referral comes about is different than an online inquiry.
I think it is, and I think the intent is different. And I think when you really look at, why people choose the agent they choose, no matter how they met that person, it's going to come down to the agent being trustworthy, and it's going to come down to the reputation and just that feel that I can trust you. That's, every poll you look at year after year, that's kind of the main reason people choose an agent, right? So I think there's an intent when somebody is being referred. The intent is, hey, you can trust this person right off the bat. So it is that influence. I think that is the intent. Or the intent in an online lead, it's often just built around generally a home search or being able to see what the market has to offer. And you get caught up with an agent that just happens to be following up with you. So it's a very different, methodology of how you've been talking
So you think in the online lead part of it, the thing is that you have to earn that trust by basically being responsive and sharing correct information. And this is where that fishing upstream and in the aspirational and the research phase, if you're the educator of them, each one of those touch points, you're building those trust points, let's just call it, or that influence with that customer for them to believe in you more than that customer, needing to feel like they need to reach out to a friend to ask for a referral. Is that kind of what I'm hearing there?
Yeah, because when you think about it, the magnet with a referral is you're the magnet, the agent's the magnet, right? That's what's bringing the thing together, right? But online leads, the magnet's really the home search. It's really about, the house and having access to a home search and information. And if it's research driven, maybe the magnet's about, good mortgage information or providers there. It's not really about the agent. They're not necessarily going on there looking for an agent. They're looking for a process or the home search, one of the two,
Right.
And they just happen to start communicating with agents because the task they're trying to accomplish is learning about research or the home search.
Right.
So, the agent has the opportunity online to start building those trust points you're talking about. And then over time, the consumer's like, I really like what you have to say. You've been right so far. You haven't led me astray. Your information's been relevant and top notch. I want to work with you.
Right.
Let's generally face it. It's never been harder to earn somebody's first dollar than it is today, but it's never been easier to keep it. Because once somebody has you, they don't want to keep recreating these processes and getting blown up by 30 different people.
Right.
They just want to go forward once they find something they're comfortable with.
Right. And I think that's part of the reason why the portals are bringing that all in-house too, is to protect their brands, making sure they're not getting slammed by a bunch of people. Long, you had something you wanted to add?
Yeah. We keep referring back to the people business, right? Because the people business is all about consumer experience and behavior. And I think too, because people work with you because they like you and trust you. So a lot of time, the online, they may be further up the stream yet. They might be aspiration, maybe start to research. Whereas when you get a referral, besides the fact that the trust already transfer, they may also be further down the road. They may be transactional because they start to talk about wanting to buy or sell. And then someone told them, you should call Mike along because they're farther along. So either way, they're both opportunities. One might be a little more motivated than the other one.
Right. In other words, you don't ask for a referral from someone until you're ready to do that one thing. Like I don't ask for a car mechanic referral unless my car is broken down. Right. So that totally makes sense.
If you look at it, it's a reticular activator too, right? What happens is when people start getting in the process of looking to move, they're thinking about moving, they're seeing other people moving, like it's the thing that they're focusing on. So they're talking about it and seeing it more. So I think once they become verbal about it, whatever pain point they're trying to solve. I need a bigger home, closer to work. Maybe I got deferred maintenance. I just want to buy a new home. Whatever that pain point is, they start talking about it, and that's when the subject of referral usually starts coming up. Is when someone's like, if you're going to move, I know a great agent. You should talk to so and so. Right. When people aren't talking about that. Generally, even when they're aspirational, it's usually I think when they become research driven, like when that's the phase we're in.
That's the kind of conversion basically from, let's say, an email inquiry to maybe a text or a phone call to real conversation. Kind of the higher the intent, the more asynchronous the communication channel is going to be. Like, again, off of that same survey where we asked, where did your last lead come from? The interesting part, I think it was something like 55 or 56% of people, it was some kind of referral. But then I followed that up with what communication channel did the person first reach out to you on your last transaction that you did? And overwhelmingly, phone calls was the primary form of communication. Second in there, which was really interesting, was Facebook Messenger. And I think this ties into what you're talking about, that online leads are all around you, including your sphere of influence, right? Because if we think of Facebook Messenger being the second way that most people said that they had the first engagement with someone, I think that's how referrals happen, because you're kind of friends and you connect that conversation through Facebook Messenger. But also at the same time, like that is your friends and family maybe reaching out to you saying, hey, I'm thinking about buying a home via Facebook Messenger instead of making the call initially. But it's interesting to see that intent basically. And, the very top of the list was call, Facebook Messenger. And then the last thing was actually emails.
Mm-hmm.
And I think an important point of this is that we're doing online marketing, we're trying to generate online leads, that when those leads are ready, and if you look at if you kind of put 2 and 2 off of that studies, what we know is that the one with the highest intent is just going to call versus fill out a form, because in that survey, it ended up being something like, 40 or 50% of people, the first touch was a phone call.
So the higher the intent, the more likely a phone call, and the more higher expectation for quick responsiveness, and the higher they want you to pay attention to them at that point. If you're calling the wrong message, wrong time, if you're calling somebody when they're not ready to talk, you actually blow your opportunity to a point. So if you look at the aspirational behavior, which, incidentally, there's more aspirational buyers out there than actual buyers. This is like your biggest pond to fish from if you know how to fish it. So when you're fishing from that aspirational pond, keep in mind, a lot of these people are really just binging on house porn. They're sitting there at night, they're clicking on things or Googling things. The lights are off. They're not even telling their spouse they're thinking of moving. Do they want a phone call from an agent at that point saying, we want to buy a house? Do you want to go take a look at one? It's a wrong message, wrong time.
Right.
In fact, you literally need to remove the pressure from that so that they don't feel weird about talking about it with you.
Zillow had an interesting thing. They, even after they registered the first time to take a look at or send in an inquiry, like on average, the person revisited Zillow like 77 times after the first inquiry that they made. So I think that just kind of lets us know. And then also when someone purchases, they continue to visit some of the online portals because they want to see, what is constantly happening in that neighborhood, because they're just curious about their own activity. So we're going to start trying to wrap this up because obviously we respect both of your times, but there's a couple questions that people posted. And so we'll go ahead and go through some of these. So Jim basically indicated, do we need to have a voice conversation in order to be able to define the art funnel, where they're at in that? And, if either one of you can maybe talk to that.
We do a lot of that over text or even sometimes an email. So any which way that we can identify the track they're on, whether it be by voice or not. I keep in mind, contact attempts don't really move people forward. It's conversations that do. You dial 100 people, talking to one, you're more productive in that one conversation than you are on the 99 dials, right? So I don't care how you get the conversation rolling about what track they're on, getting them on the phone, is going to move the relationship forward. But sometimes they're just not ready for that. If they're not responsive, get the question answered any which way that you can.
Long, what are some of your thoughts, since you generated all of these massive amount of phone calls and stuff like that back in the REO days? Do you think that you actually need to have a conversation, or do you think that even the type of initial inquiry is kind of that first clue in terms of where they're at in that funnel?
Yeah, I think what you said, process system, that's when I put all those signs on the yard. That's how Mike and I actually met. So Mike came in and started putting all the system and process together, is because you need to at least respond when they inquire, right? So once you get to respond to inquire, now you start some engagement. So if they start engaging back with you, it doesn't matter if it's a text or phone call or email. Once they engage with you, then you just follow up and based on what's the best channel of engagement. Like back then, we didn't do a lot of messenger. Now 20 billion messengers are sent each month back and forth. So now you don't even need people's phone number. Hey, call Long Doan, my agent. They just look up Long Doan. Now they're IMing me without knowing my email and my phone number. So it's totally different than. So the key is just as long as you make that connection, start engaging, and you take over.
Let me make one point there too, Jesse. So, on the sign calls that we did with Long, keep in mind, when you're really looking at it, when people are inquiring on specific property, not general home search stuff or mortgage stuff or research driven stuff, but specific property, that usually shows higher intent.
Right.
Because it's XYZ Main Street that they want access or information to. That's a key indicator. They're probably transactional or close to it.
Yeah, NAR has a pretty interesting study that floats around every year, basically, and they ask, what's the time to conversion and what's the first kind of activities and things like that. And so in there, they'll look at an average of 10 homes. It's usually over 10 weeks, and it typically starts off with open house. So in other words, they'll do all of their online research. So almost everything else is online, but once they get into the car and they go from kind of digital to physical and get in the car and start driving, they're very almost at that point, it's kind of an initial definition that they're in that transactional stage, just because they're probably going to make 10 or 15 inquiries on different properties over the next, 12 weeks or 10 weeks, and then they're probably going to convert. So I think just those simple clues, kind of like proactively listening to what someone is really saying, I think you can use that same type of proactive listening regardless of the channel, if it's a text or if it's a Facebook Messenger or anything, to really define that intent. You just have to look at what they're responding to and what they're doing, and being super proactive on some of that stuff. So
let's be honest. When they're only responding to email, that's a buffer, and maybe they release some of that buffer, and now they're starting to respond over time to more text messages, but still not phone calls. As they get more transactional, they want to talk on the phone and they want to set appointments and go look at specific property. They're more likely to have those phone conversations or a buyer's consult or something the closer they are to actually doing something. So you have to kind of read their consumer behavior, make sure that your agent behavior is in line.
Right. So just kind of as a last thing, I know this is kind of, I think it becomes really important in terms of conversations that we're having with these online leads and converting. Do you guys recommend that you get buyer representation forms and ask if the customer is pre-qualified upfront, or do you kind of build that relationship a little bit, maybe give them one free showing, and then use that opportunity there on that face-to-face for those agents? And if we can close out with that, that would be great. Like if you can kind of give what you believe is best practices there.
I would say that I don't even think I believe. I know this for a fact. I've got burnt a couple times in my production career when I was in production by taking people out that were non-qualified. But I did 1,000% more business because I just took a shot with people, showed up, got a face-to-face. If they're not qualified today, I would nurture them. My longest term nurture sometimes was 2 years. I'd get them ready, and then I needed business 2 years from now. So the face-to-face, you're trying to build a high influence level conversations, those moments that you're really going to connect with people, because it's a people business. It's a connection business. The more the connections you have, the better the connections, the more you're going to produce. So I would never, ever, ever refuse to go show somebody a house without proof of pre-approval. I'll go show it to you, and I'll help you get pre-approval if needed. If I can convert you to my lender versus somebody else, that's going to be huge for me for conversion too, because if you go to a different lender, that lender might try to pull you to their agent. Right. So I actually like the ability to take them to my lender. So approved or not, I'm still doing it.
Yeah, so I would add to that too, is on an average, people know 250 people. So even if they may not be ready to buy or sell just because you are working with them, you might get a shot at a referral to their cousin, their friend, who's now ready to buy or sell. Right. And the other thing that I would add is that because online is so important with online lead, you got to start making sure that you build your own profile and social proof on reviews and video, because visibility is credibility, right? When they see you all over the place, by the time you contact them, the engagement might be way easier and better than they've never heard of you before.
Kind of the same, if you think of like the old adage that listers last, right? The sign in the yard is kind of social proof to the neighborhood that agent is successful. But like you said, visibility is credibility. So you could actually fake that, online by just having all of your social media basically set up and all of your profiles optimized, whether it's LinkedIn and everywhere else, basically. So I think that's a great tip there in terms of building that credibility ahead of time, because it is, like you said, social proof that, that person is successful. And that's kind of what the yard signs define, and why, listers last is simply because when all of the neighbors see the social proof in the yards that, RGI has got, 500 listings or 1,000 listings, that in itself starts to pick up steam. So
one question we could address here too, Jesse, I see Kelly wanted to know about at what point to bring them over from a YLOPO search or something else to the MLS. I want to be very blunt on this one, or clear on this one too. I talk about teaching our agents to use portable terminology. We always like to use privatize your search. We do this with aspirational buyers too. Let me privatize your search and quiet your phone, because if you keep, engaging with things online, you're going to have agents calling you all over the place. So I'll set you up. And I usually like to leave them, Kelly, on my YLOPO search versus the MLS, so I can see their behavior. I get notifications sent to my phone when they do something, rather than me having to go into the MLS to physically check. Because the more tasks I have to accomplish as an agent, the less likely I am to do it. I want all that automated, so it's super easy.
Long, do you have something you want to add to that?
Nope, I'm good, but.
All right. Okay. Well, again, for time, we just want to say thank you very much. Hopefully everyone found this super useful. If you have any questions, put them on the comments on the Facebook Live, because that way we can go back through after this gets reposted and we can maybe answer some of those questions. And again, thanks for everyone who tuned in. We really appreciate it. Hope that you enjoyed this session. And of course, thanks to everyone at Lab Coats for making this available to all of us. And thank you very much. We'll talk to you guys soon.
Yes.
Thank you.